significance of lakes like this one and rivers and marshes seems to have been something to do with the properties of water itself. I mean, if you look at the lake here, you'll see that it's a solid sheet of water which reflects the hills and the woodlands around it very well indeed. And I think that relates to a feeling that water was a kind of liminal space, that is a space on the edge between this world and the other world. Now, if we can project this back into antiquity, what we're getting is gifts to the gods who are thought to dwell underneath the surface of the water.
From the beginning, the cauldrons belonged to the gods. They were not of this world. They evoked magic and wonder and the supernatural. But cauldrons were also elusive and unpredictable. In an early Welsh poem, King Arthur leads his men to the other world to steal a magic cauldron. This cauldron apparently had a personality of its own. It needed the breath of 9 virgins to heat it, and like Dagda's cauldron, it too would only feed a hero. In the end, Arthur did steal it from the Lord of the Underworld, but at the massive cost of almost all his forces. 3,000 years ago, a primitive vessel had the power to determine the destiny of kings. It controlled the fertility of the land, augured death, and held out the promise of life. The Celts indulged in bizarre rituals to procure the blessings of the cauldron. And the Celts were not the only pagans to worship a sacred vessel. Ancient Romans were also devoted to their gods, especially Bacchus, the god of wine. Beneath a makeshift tent in the English county of Wiltshire are ruins of a Roman villa dating back to the 3rd century. Here, near the northernmost edge of Rome's vast empire, colonists venerated the enigmatic gods they had brought with them from the Mediterranean. This striking mosaic floor suggests a shrine dedicated to the wine god Bacchus. These panthers, whose strength and beauty were often associated with Bacchus, are shown flanking a vessel brimming with wine. They are about to increase their power by consuming the god in the form of wine. It's thought these animals represent human worshippers seeking eternal life. On a Roman figurine found in London, Bacchus is described as the god who gives life to wandering men. Hominibus Bacchus Vitam, which suggests he's a god of salvation. Roman gods and goddesses promised salvation to those who partook of them through food and drink. Ceres, the corn goddess, could be eaten, and Bacchus, the wine god, was imbibed from a cup. Now the modern magic of virtual reality brings this ancient Roman villa back to life. A villa in which many a banquet would have led to a bacchanal, or drunken orgy. The Roman poet Ovid left a vivid description of such a bacchanal. He observed that, encouraged by erotic music and dancing, participants sipped from goblets made sacred by the wine of the god. As religious experience and wild party intertwined, the ritual built to a climax as Bacchus entered their bodies. Intoxicated with Bacchus, whose body was the wine, revelers finally abandoned themselves to the orgy until they and the god had become one. From the wine of a pagan god to the blood of Christ may take a leap of faith. But the legend of the Holy Grail is full of arcane symbols and obscure rituals. Soon, all the primitive myths embodied in a sacred vessel would begin to coalesce into an object more powerful than any that had come before. But first, there would be one more transformation. Living in the shadow of the Roman Empire was a culture with a relic that may be the actual precursor of the Holy Grail. For 3,000 years, Jews around the world have celebrated Passover with a cup to remember the Exodus from Egypt. Jesus was a Jew well-versed in Hebrew tradition. Today, most biblical scholars agree that the Last Supper was a Passover meal.
As they were eating, Jesus took bread and blessed and broke it and said, "This is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them and said, "This is the blood of the covenant, which is poured out for the many. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life."
Today, the same ritual, called the Eucharist, is the culmination of the Catholic Mass. The vessel sacred to Christians is lifted towards heaven as bread and wine are transformed into the body and blood of Christ. According to British theologian Rowan Williams, the whereabouts of the Holy Grail is no mystery.
The Grail is, in the sense that matters, there at every Eucharist. Christ is there at every Mass. There's nothing to look for. So there's no mysterious secret about this grace-giving presence of Jesus Christ in the Last Supper. It's here. Materially, literally here. Christ is not a distant person, and the cup of the Last Supper is not a strange, lost, magical object, because Christ is as present now as he was at the Last Supper, and whatever cup he pours his blood into now is the Grail.
If the Church is right, consuming the body and blood of Christ through bread and wine is the closest most of us will ever come to finding the Holy Grail. It's the promise of redemption that's priceless, not the cup. But through the centuries, the existence of a tangible relic with magical powers would continue to haunt even the most devout. In the Middle Ages, the quest for a real Holy Grail, not salvation, occupied sinners and saints alike. This magnificent monastery in France was made famous by a Cistercian monk named Bernard of Clairvaux, who became its abbot in 1115. Bernard was a saint and the greatest thinker of his time. The cathedral in nearby Troyes is famous for only one relic, his skull. But from that skull flowed some astonishing new ideas unheard of in the 12th century. Bernard believed that only God was worth dying for, and that a holy war was a grand adventure. But to be victorious, a crusader needed some lofty rules to live by, which Bernard dutifully penned.
A knight should be virtuous and prepared to fight to the death. He is never to decline battle, even when outnumbered, never to accept ransom, and never to cry for mercy. A knight should be poor, chaste, yet kind to women. Love ennobles a man. If he abides by these rules, then there is happiness for the martyr and glory for the conqueror.
These Cistercian virtues of charity, chastity, and love became the code of chivalry made famous by the legend of King Arthur. They also inspired a new caste of priestly warriors that would bring honor to the Crusades. The secret order known as the Knights Templar was founded in 1119 AD to protect pilgrims en route to the Holy Land and to defend Jerusalem and the Holy Sepulchre, the tomb of Christ. Before the arrival of the Templars, a medieval knight was anything but perfect, according to Oxford professor of French literature, Tony Hunt.
There is no doubt that chivalry is not a good word to describe what in practice was looting, destruction wreaked by knights who were little different from what we might refer to today as yobs. In other words, there was a very violent society developing in 12th century France, and one of the ways in which this violence could be curbed and channeled was to try to provide some sort of ethical upgrading of knighthood. And you see this, of course, with the crusade and the way in which they can redeem themselves and this chivalry by going to fight for God.
Thousands of Templar knights died on the battlefield defending the Christian faith. But thousands more returned home from the Holy Land and quietly made their way across Europe with a fortune in gold and sacred relics taken from Jerusalem. The treasure lay hidden for centuries and to this day has never been found. Even now, there are those who believe the Templar Knights still exist and remain the secret guardians of the Holy Grail. A short distance from Clairvaux, at Avalure, is a working farm that was once part of a Templar settlement. To the casual observer, the chapel looks like a medieval landmark. But far less conspicuous are the intriguing symbols on a building nearby. The barn bears the crest of the Crusaders, a holy cross. Concealed in the barn, far away from prying eyes, are vestiges of the Templars more in keeping with their image as a secret brotherhood. When this wall collapsed some years ago, the farmers here found pottery, wine jugs, and ceramics dating back to medieval times. But there were no signs of the Templars' fabled treasure or the Holy Grail. If the monks of Clairvaux Monastery once knew where it was, they remained silent on the subject. The Templar Knights, too, took their secrets to the grave, but the power of the written word would soon heighten the mystique of the sacred cup. A 2-hour drive southeast of Paris, in the Champagne region of France, is the birthplace of the Grail legend in literature. Its author was Chrétien de Troyes, considered by most scholars the greatest literary genius of the French Middle Ages. Today, the city of Troyes is a living museum of medieval architecture. It was here, around 1175 AD, that Chrétien wrote the oldest surviving story of the Grail. Ironically, his Grail was neither a cup nor was it holy.